Experience the epic series that the world is watching and raving about. Catch up or relive the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones, now on HBO On Demand, and watch back-to-back episodes anytime on your schedule. This year, join the Legion of Followers and enjoy past seasons of Game of Thrones, plus the premiere of Season 4 on April 6th on HBO. Don't miss out. Sign up for HBO and get free access to HBO On Demand.
Good evening, Bahamas. You're tuned into NB12 Weekend, broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios on Robinson Road. Coming up tonight in news, government reevaluating the role of the defense force in the fight against crime, a call for public-private partnership in corrections, a case study being conducted on the public's views on legal marijuana, and find out if you're susceptible to identity theft. Those stories and so much more coming up. I'm Paige McCartney, and NB12 Weekend starts right now. On NB12 Weekend. Last summer, government deployed about 150 Royal Bahamas Defense Force officers to assist police in the fight against crime, in a measure that was expected to be temporary. Now, nearly a year later, dozens of Defense Force officers are still deployed, providing additional manpower to the police force. Minister of National Security, Dr. Bernard Nottage, says this comes as government reevaluates the role of the Defense Force in the wider scope of fighting crime.
The way we are using the Defense Force may change, but it is likely that we'll be using members of the Defense Force to do specific tasks well into the future. Not perhaps very large numbers, but they have some skills that we might need to use in our attempts to reduce crime.
Last July, Nottage told reporters that the use of Defense Force officers to assist police was not meant to be a permanent thing, as government had plans to recruit more police officers. However, he says trends in the region show that more countries are using their military forces to provide support as needed in other sectors of their respective countries.
The Commodore was recently at a Heads of Defense Force meeting for the Caribbean. And what he's discovered is what we've been considering, and that is that more and more defense forces in the region are being used to supplement the police force in many countries.
A class of 83 Marines recently graduated from training. They will help supplement the force's complement of around 1,300 Marines. While prison reform is expected to place a higher focus on rehabilitating offenders as opposed to the current penal system, the Correctional Services Bill was passed in the House of Assembly late last year, making room for reform, which is expected to introduce major changes at Her Majesty's Prison. However, there are some who believe that the reform needs to go a step further, taking corrections out of the government's hands. Christina McNeil has the story.
The majority of incarcerated offenders return home after serving their time. But according to the executive director of Project Re-Entry, the rehabilitation of those offenders should begin from the moment they step foot inside the prison. For that to take place, Troy Clark says all stakeholders need to be on board, something that would be better done through a public-private partnership.
We need to actually train. Yes, they have senior officers away in Canada, but we need to actually train all of our officers in the field of corrections so that they will understand the importance of rehabilitation, reformation, and reintegration of offenders, because what we believe that re-entry doesn't start when a person is leaving Her Majesty's Prison or a prison facility. Re-entry starts when an individual enters Her Majesty's Prison or a correction facility.
The bill calls for Her Majesty's Prison to be renamed the Bahamas Department of Correctional Services. Clark contends that a name change is not enough to effect change. Rather, he says the proper foundation must be laid to train officers and reintegrate offenders once they have served their time.
We too like to work in silos, and we need to move away from working in silos. And we too like to actually depend on government for everything. What we need to do is demand from our government, who we put in place to actually bolster us in the sense of helping us with funding, but all the other technical support. But we have the training and exposure of knowing what needs to be happening or done in our various communities. If you have a correctional facility, you need all the stakeholders in place. You need a reentry council to be established where you have persons from the health sector, people from the employment sector, the Chamber of Commerce, people from the faith-based or the religious sector, and people from the community that actually come along, work together, and actually assist in managing that correction facilities.
The bill makes provisions for a new Correctional Services Review Board, which will review the prison periodically and inspect the facilities at least once every quarter, essentially acting as a watchdog for the prison. Clark, who considers himself a correctional specialist, said he would be happy to assist in the creation of a correctional facility.
I am a member of the American Correctional Association, the North Carolina Correctional Association, and I do correctional work. I teach corrections to officers up there at Her Majesty's Prison. And I know there's a thought of renaming Her Majesty's Prison, Bahamas Correctional Department or something like that. I don't think that facility needs to be. I think what needs to happen is that a separate facility needs to be created as a correctional institute. Private, public collaboration with a correction facility will be much better than just renaming Her Majesty's Prison with officers who are not trained in the field of corrections, and the facility is not adequately prepared for rehabilitation.
President of the Prison Officers Association, Gregory Archer, has said prison officers will not support the correctional bill in its current state. He says corrections training is necessary before HMP can be renamed and the act implemented. The Correctional Services Bill repeals the 70-year-old Prison Act. Reporting for NB12, I'm Christina McNeil.
And the National Security Minister today confirming that government is considering proposals to create a public-private partnership for corrections in the country. So far, he says government has been presented with several proposals along those lines.
The private partnership would not be beyond our consideration. I've met with one or two groups for the preliminary talks, but it's not yet been a decision made about that.
And those proposals also include recommendations for the construction of a new facility to replace the current one at Fox Hill.
We have had some proposals which have been sent to us. I have to say that there have been no serious discussions about a new prison at this time. But I think eventually it's going to have to be, because particularly the maximum security aspect of our prison is really very old and outdated.
And Nottage commended Prison Superintendent Patrick Wright for the work he's done at the prison since assuming that post. Nottage said recent upgrades to the prison include repairs to the roof of the maximum security block and the introduction of toilets to some areas. And police need your help tonight finding an armed robbery suspect. George Nixon, also known as Babu, is described as slim with a dark brown complexion. His last known address is Lyon Road. Take a look at your screen if you know where this man is. Police want you to contact them at 328-TIPS. Well, as the rest of the world determines whether it will legalize marijuana, the discussion locally is inevitable, according to market research consultant Wale Ramming. His company, Public Domain, has recently started a field study asking Bahamians their views on legalizing marijuana for medical purposes in the Bahamas. Statistics from Her Majesty's Prison show that more than half of its inmates are serving time for drug-related offenses, with marijuana being the main drug associated. Government said last year that it's considering implementing a drug treatment court that would provide rehabilitation to those convicted of possessing small amounts of illegal drugs, rather than having them serve hard time at Fox Hill Prison. Well, Ramming said given the backlog in the justice system caused by charges for the possession of small amounts of marijuana, legalization needs to be considered.
We've heard several people from both sides of the aisle and different walks of life and society say that, we're going to at some point start talking about legalizing marijuana. As we know, it's happening state by state in the U.S. now. And we kind of wanted to know what Bahamians thought about this. And it's a bit preliminary and we'll have some final results, but right now the major striking thing for me is a third of the Bahamian population doesn't know how they feel about this.
Well, CARICOM heads discussed at the 27th meeting of the Bureau in September last year the decriminalization of marijuana and its production for medicinal purposes in certain jurisdictions in the region. However, Minister of State for Legal Affairs Damian Gomez has said the possibility of legalizing marijuana is not on government's agenda at this time. Raming said the first step is increasing public discussion.
It's not a yes, it's just we don't really know, so there needs to be more conversation about it.
Former Christian Council President Bishop Simeon Hall has gone on the record to MB12 saying that a lesser penalty like community service is more fitting for Bahamians convicted of possession of small amounts of marijuana. Stick with us. When MB12 returns, what you can do to protect yourself from identity theft. We'll tell you more about that and other stories when MB12 Weekend comes right back.